My son hadn't answered his phone in 2 weeks, so I went to his house. It was unlocked and in chaos, but he was gone. Then, I heard a sound from under my grandson's bed. When the police and I lifted the mattress, we found the little boy huddled there, clutching an empty bottle, his eyes wide with a terror he couldn't voice, a terror born from witnessing his father's murder. My son hadn't answered his phone in 2 weeks. I decided to go to his house unannounced. But when I got there, I noticed something moving under my grandson's bed. When the police lifted the mattress, what we found left everyone frozen in shock. I still remember it perfectly. On that fateful day, I took the first bus heading to Chicago. During the 3-hour ride, my eyes were glued to the window, my heart a tight knot of anxiety. When I got off at the main terminal, it was already getting dark. Every step toward the gated community where my son, Daniel, lived felt heavy, as if I were walking into a nightmare. Standing in front of the familiar wooden door, I knocked, first gently, then with more force. "Daniel, Matthew," I shouted, but my voice broke in the cold air. No one answered. I tried the doorknob on a whim, and it turned. The door creaked open. It was unlocked. My heart began to pound. Daniel never left the door unlocked. He was always so careful, especially with my 8-year-old grandson, Matthew, at home. I stepped inside, holding my breath. The living room was a mess. The sofa was shoved out of place, and a shattered coffee mug lay on the floor, its white porcelain shards mixed with a dark, dried stain. In the kitchen, the water cooler jug was tipped on its side, empty water bottles rolling on the floor. The damp, stale smell and the oppressive silence sent a chill down my spine. I went upstairs, my heart hammering in my ears. Daniel's office was empty. His bedroom was empty. Finally, I reached Matthew's room. "Matthew, where are you, sweetie?" I called out, my voice hoarse. Silence. I stood in the middle of the room, looking at his toys, when a small scraping sound came from under the bed, like a plastic bottle rolling on the hardwood floor. I froze. "Matthew?" I called again. Only silence answered. Panic took over. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to dial 911 3 times to get it right. "My son is missing," I practically screamed into the phone. There's a strange noise under my grandson's bed. In less than 10 minutes, the red and blue lights of a patrol car filled the window. I led 2 officers to Matthew's room and pointed at the bed. A young, tall officer knelt down. "Is anyone under there?" he called out firmly. A heavy silence filled the room. Then, without another word, the 2 officers lifted the bed in one single motion. And there I saw him. It was Matthew, curled up underneath. He was impossibly thin, his hair matted with sweat, his clothes filthy. He was clutching an empty water bottle, his eyes wide open but expressionless, as if he were looking into a world I couldn't reach. I fell to my knees, wanting to hug him but terrified to touch him. "Matthew, my boy," I whispered, tears finally breaking free. He didn't respond. He just stayed there, clinging to his bottle as if it were the last thing keeping him alive. I didn't know what had happened, but I knew this nightmare was just beginning. My name is Helen. I'm 61 years old, and my story begins with those 2 eternal weeks of unanswered calls. Daniel had always called me at least once a week, telling me about his job, about Matthew. His sudden silence was not like him at all. By the 5th day, the anxiety was eating me alive. I called his landline, his friends, his coworkers. No one had seen him. On the 10th day, I called his neighbors. An elderly woman across the street told me that on the night of a recent storm, she saw a light in Daniel's house suddenly turn on, then off. Her words stabbed my heart like a knife. After 2 weeks of silence, I couldn't wait any longer. I had to go to him. And what I found only made my anguish grow. Now I'm sitting in the dim light of a hospital room. A police officer carried Matthew from that cold house, and I ran after them. A soulless shadow. At the hospital, doctors and nurses rushed him into the emergency room. I watched through the glass, hearing their hurried voices. No external injuries, severe malnutrition, severe dehydration, signs of psychological trauma. Every word was a blow. Later, I was allowed in. Matthew lay on the bed, and 4 in his thin arm, his eyes still wide and vacant. I sat beside him, holding his cold little hand. The police arrived, and I recounted the 2 weeks of silence, and the horrific discovery. That night, I watched Matthew as he slept in fits, trembling and clutching a teddy bear a nurse had given him. He would jolt awake, his eyes wide with terror, but no sound would come out. 2 days passed like this. A child psychologist came, but Matthew remained silent, a little boy locked away inside himself. On the morning of the 3rd day, the phone rang. It was the lead detective. "Mrs. Helen," he said, his voice grave, "I need you to prepare yourself. We used luminol to re-examine Mr. Daniel's house. We found a very large amount of blood in the living room. It's very likely we're dealing with a homicide." The world went silent. The washcloth in my hand fell to the floor. Then, Matthew tugged hard on my sleeve. His eyes were red, filled with tears, and after so many days of silence, he burst into a heartbreaking cry. "Dad," he screamed, his voice weak but full of pain. "He's dead." I fell back into the chair, hugging him as my own tears streamed down my cheeks. An hour later, the police were back. A slim, kind-faced officer sat by the bed. "Matthew," she said softly, "can you tell us what happened?" I held my breath as Matthew, after a long silence, began to speak, his voice a trembling whisper. "That night, it was raining really hard," he began. "The doorbell rang many times. Dad looked through the peephole, and his face got tense. He clutched his teddy bear tighter. He pushed me toward my room and whispered, 'Matthew, get under the bed quickly. Don't come out until I call for you.' Tears rolled down my cheeks as I pictured my little boy, huddled in the dark. Through a little gap," Matthew continued, "I saw my mom come in with a very tall man. His face was cold. My mom looked around and asked, 'Where is Matthew?' Dad told her, 'I went to Grandma's for winter break.' I knew he was lying. My mom? Jessica, Daniel's ex-wife. I thought she was gone for good." Matthew's voice broke. "My mom started yelling at him, asking for money. She said something about a debt. Dad shook his head. He told her she had gone too far. Then they started fighting really bad. The tall man pushed my dad and he fell and hit his head on the corner of the table. There was a loud thud and red water started coming out. Matthew trembled uncontrollably, hiding his face in my chest, sobbing. I saw Dad lying there, not moving. I wanted to come out, but I was so scared. I hugged him with all my strength, my own tears soaking his hair. I remembered Daniel in his 20s, so full of hope, introducing me to Jessica. She had been a sweet girl then, but their life together unraveled. Jessica developed a gambling addiction. Daniel sold his car, drained his savings, and I gave him mine to pay off her debts. She became irritable, cruel. I saw Matthew huddled in a corner once after she'd screamed at him for spilling milk. Daniel finally divorced her and won full custody, thinking their nightmare was over. But she had come back. The detective's call came the next morning. "Mrs. Helen," he said, "we have new information." I entrusted Matthew to a kind nurse and hurried to the precinct. A security camera from a neighbor had recorded a suspicious truck in front of Daniel's house on the night of the storm. The image was blurry, but you could make out something long covered with a tarp in the back. The model matches one used by a local loan shark gang, the detective explained. The pieces began to fit together in a terrifying way. While I was at the precinct, my phone rang again. A detective was at Jessica's last known address. "She left 2 weeks ago," he reported. "The landlady said she was in a real hurry, hired some guy to drive her away at night. And a loan shark just showed up looking for her. She owed him a lot of money, but swore she'd pay him back in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. The timeline was a perfect, horrible match. That night, as I sat by Matthew's bed, a memory surfaced like a flash of lightning. Years ago, Daniel had proudly shown me a life insurance policy. "I want to protect my family, Mom," he had said. The sole beneficiary was Jessica. I felt a cold dread creep over me. Daniel had never mentioned changing it. The next morning, I called the detective with my suspicion. They went back to Daniel's house and, after an hour of searching his study, they found it. A blue folder containing the life insurance policy. Jessica's name was still listed as the beneficiary. The motive was now chillingly clear. That night, the phone rang one more time. The detective's voice was halting. "Mrs. Helen, we found a body. A man, hidden in an abandoned frozen goods warehouse the loan shark gang uses. We suspect it's Mr. Daniel." The world fell apart. The next morning, I stood in a morgue, a young officer's hand on my shoulder. The white sheet was pulled back. It was my son. His face was pale, changed by death, but it was him. I fell to my knees, my voice a broken whisper. My son. The medical examiner confirmed he had died from a severe traumatic brain injury. The investigation closed in quickly after that. They found the truck. In the back was a blanket stained with Daniel's blood and Jessica's jacket. The accomplice, the tall man, was arrested and confessed, revealing Jessica's hiding place. A few days later, they caught her in a copy shop, trying to forge documents to flee the city. The trial took place in the city courthouse. I sat in the front row, holding Matthew's hand. He didn't want to come, but I told him, "We have to do this for your dad." The prosecutor presented the evidence: Matthew's recorded statement, the security footage, the life insurance policy, the DNA from the truck. Jessica, in the defendant's box, finally broke. "I didn't mean to kill him," she screamed. "I just wanted my money." The judge's voice was firm as she delivered the verdict. Jessica was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her accomplice received 20 years. I broke down, hugging Matthew, my tears a mix of grief and relief. "It's over, my boy," I whispered. "Your dad can finally rest in peace." I took Matthew to live with me in my small town. I enrolled him in therapy, and every night I told him stories about the father who had loved him more than anything in the world. As the seasons changed, the light slowly began to return to Matthew's eyes. He started to smile again, a fragile, beautiful thing. I knew the pain of losing his father would never fully disappear, but I promised Daniel, and I promised myself, that I would spend the rest of my life protecting his son, nurturing the bright spark that Jessica had tried so hard to extinguish. Our small family, forged in tragedy, would survive.